Paint Care is all about keeping it simple for district residents. They make recycling leftover paint easy with convenient locations like your local paint store. Paint Care has 3 simple rules for painting smarter and reducing waste. 1, buy the right amount of paint for the job. 2, use up what's left. And 3, recycle the rest. Visit paintcare.org/3simplerules to learn more, or find a paint drop-off site near you. Today on CityCast DC, if you're someone like me who finds joy in the simple pleasure of grocery shopping in DC, listen up, because that might be threatened by a DC grocery institution's recent policy change. My co-host Mike Schaefer joins me to indulge this particular rant that I have. Today's Thursday, June 20th. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about.
Hey, Bridget.
Hey, Mike.
So I understand you've got a grievance, and there's nothing that makes city life work more than people with grievances. What's on your mind?
So thank you for that. Grievances are a part of city life. If I sound angry about this, it's because it's one of those little things that it might not seem like a big deal, but to me it is a very big deal. So yeah, I've got a bee in my bonnet. As some folks might know, I live in Columbia Heights, and I live really close to the Giant on 14th and Park. I have lived in this area for over 10 years, right? So I've been shopping at that Giant for a very long time. Me and that Giant have a very long and storied relationship history. I would also say that, I am one of those people that loves grocery shopping. It is a simple pleasure in life to me. Are you one of those people?
Yes. And I don't like it when other people grocery shop for me. I'd like to be able to look at the stuff.
The idea of somebody else grocery shopping for me, I can't even imagine it. I'm like, no, I want to pick the exact avocado I want.
Right.
So Giant has made this recent policy change that I'm finding personally very threatening. And it is threatening to disrupt this small, simple pleasure of urban life for me.
So what they done?
So here's what's going on. As of May 23rd, Giant has this new bag policy, which says nobody can bring in bags larger than 14 by 14 by 6. If you're not a visual person, that is not a very large bag. That is a normal freezer bag. That is a medium-sized backpack. That is a normal-sized reusable tote. We're not talking about a massive duffel bag. That is a pretty normal-sized bag that they're now saying you cannot bring into the store.
And the Todd household requires more vegetables than that.
You know what? We do. That is absolutely correct. So can you imagine what it is that they're saying is the reason for this rule change?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is the rare grocery store policy change that has merited newspaper stories. I mean, this is part of the bigger narrative of the last few years of shoplifting in DC and pilferage that grocery chains say is making it hard for them to stay in business, et cetera. And they're saying this is what they got to do to crack down on pilferage. By the way, I'm a former Columbia Heights Giant regular myself. When I lived there, though.
So you know that Giant.
No, I don't. Because when I lived there, I lived right there at 14th and Newton. And the Giant was it's where the Tip Cow is now. And it was the worst, dirtiest Giant ever. And they knocked it down. And there's this gleaming, beautiful Giant that you go to in the newly redone 14th Street corridor. Anyways, my reaction to this has just been oh man, this is why we can't have nice things. That there is this rush of shoplifting and it sucks. And those of us who don't shoplift now have to pay this incredibly annoying consequence of either, the guy checking your receipt when you leave the store, which I hate. Or in your case, if you don't happen to drive to your grocery store, it's really hard to do your grocery shopping because you can't lug enough stuff this way.
Exactly. So they're actually not just doing it at that location. It's happening in all DC stores and select regional branches, including ones in nearby Virginia and Maryland. They say that these stores are experiencing levels of product theft that have become unsustainable for our business. However, I actually looked at their annual report. It doesn't say anything about that theft being specifically the kind of theft where people go in with bags. And so that theft could be self-checkout theft, right? Like we have no idea. They have not given any other public information about the exact nature of that theft. So, in case you can't tell, I find this completely unacceptable. And I think it completely misses just how people who live in urban environments like Columbia Heights shop. Like, maybe this would sting less if you are the kind of person who lives in the kind of community where you drive your car up to the grocery store. There's plentiful parking. You park, you go and you shop, you wheel your stuff out in a cart, and then you drive it home. But people in Columbia Heights, they're riding their bike to the store, they're carrying stuff home on a backpack, they're shopping before or after work. So that means maybe they're wheeling one of those granny carts into the store. I think that this policy, it feels like it completely misses the way that like people in cities like DC live their life. And I think that you really make a good point. I think that Giant is hoping that we see this as like a, oh, well, we should blame the criminals who can't stop going into stores and stealing things. This is their fault. And that's partially true. But I also think more importantly, this is a Giant policy issue. I think that Giant is really using this to sort of make the math work on running a retail corporation in 2024, math that has gotten increasingly harder with like things like inflation and changes in shopper behavior and staffing issues. And I think they're saying, well, if this bag policy helps us add a little bit more to our revenue, even if it inconveniences our customers, we'll do it. So I don't think it's something where we should just be blaming the criminals. I think that's what Giant is hoping that we're doing. But I really think that we should be asking, like, how does it benefit Giant to push the problems that theft and crime cause further onto the consumer rather than dealing with it as a corporation? Does that make sense?
Yeah. Look, here's how I see it. And Giant, like all these grocery chains, it's a for-profit company. And they are going to try to make as much money as they can and see what we will tolerate. So whether that means like we have to raise the price to a point that, people stop buying or make the experience less pleasant in order to save money. So like when all these groceries chains switched to like self-checkout, right? I hate self-checkout. It's nice to have somebody like check you out and put your stuff in bags, right? Like that's a convenience. Where I live up Connecticut Avenue, and the Safeway near me is a lot of seniors in there. And boy, when they introduced the self checkout, that was a lot of confusion going on. But look, we put up with that, and I'm sure that there's like some extra pilferage as a result of self checkout because you can sneak a little something in your bag. So they're making cost benefit calculations as to what we will put up with. And one of them now is this, like, will you put up with not being able to bring your own bag of a certain size into the store with having to, like, I don't know, maybe you have to buy their bag when you leave if you have a whole lot of stuff. They're sort of testing that out. And on the one hand, like maybe the market will sort this out, that they will lose enough business that they're like, we're not going to do that. But on the other hand, what we've seen is consumers will put up with a whole lot of inconvenience in the name of prices.
So I have so much to say about this. So you talked about self-checkout. I remember when Giant went all in on self-checkout, when they put those new lanes in, they really invested in it. Well, a lot of retail stores did that. And now a lot of retail stores are backing away from that because, as you correctly pointed out, data shows that retail utilizing self-checkout technology have loss rates more than twice the industry average. So if you are genuinely concerned about theft, it's not the bag policies, it's self-checkout. However, if these stores did not lean on self-checkout, they would have to hire more human staff. And that's really the problem here. I think that retailers all over the country, but Giant also, is really having trouble figuring out how to hire, train, and retain and pay staff. And so these investments in things like self-checkouts is how they kind of cut corners and say, okay, well, then we don't have to hire as much staff if we have people just using self-checkout. That's increasing theft. And they're like, oh, well, in one reality, we could just hire humans to properly run our stores. Or no, you don't want to spend that money. We'll just pass that problem onto the consumer. And I think that you're exactly right that, part of this is Giant being like, well, what will your average DC shopper tolerate and what will they not tolerate? However, I think that because Giant represents a pretty big market share of retail grocery chains in DC, I think that what is more likely to happen is that other big stores will then institute this policy that if Giant's going to do it, all the stores in the area will start doing it. And then where will you be able to shop and enjoy the simple pleasure of picking out a good avocado?
So I suspect their answer to this would be, look, we're in a business with pretty tight profit margins, with a lot of competition. I mean, there used to just be basically Safeway and Giant, and now there's Costco in the mix. There's Wegmans, there's Harris Teeter, there's Trader Joe's. There's all kinds of things now. So we're in a highly competitive, thin margins industry, and we've got to do what we've got to do to make the thing affordable. And in fact, there's a labor union representing the workers at Giant, and I think Safeway too. It's a pretty good union. They're in a much better situation than grocery workers in a lot of other parts of the country. Their view, I guess, would be, look, we got to try to save money wherever we can, or else people aren't going to come and we're going to go out of business. And I have a lot of sympathy for that point of view from a purely brain point of view. But when it's like my own experience, I hate it. I hate the sort of feeling like you're treated like a potential criminal. And as well as the inconvenience of no, I can't actually bike there because I can't carry enough stuff out.
It's time for everyone's favorite summer festival. This year's Smithsonian Folklife Festival theme is Indigenous Voices of the Americas, and it will celebrate the National Museum of the American Indian. There will be 6 days packed with programming, with more than 290 participants from 60 Indigenous communities across the Western Hemisphere. Indigenous artists, professional chefs, musicians, dancers, athletes, and storytellers will demonstrate traditions and teach workshops that are all free to the public. And don't miss all the Indigenous-inspired cuisine, both on the mall and inside the museum at the Mitsitam Native Foods Cafe. The festival will be on the National Mall from June 26th until July 1st. All events are free, and the festival will be open daily from 11 a.m. to 5:30 p.m. Learn more at festival.si.edu.
Local businesses are the lifeblood of a community. That's why at CityCast, we love introducing you to so many of them. And when it comes to supporting local businesses financially, no other bank does it like Eagle Bank. With both business and personal banking expertise, Eagle Bank has invested in our community for more than 25 years. They know the people, the culture, the history, the challenges, and most importantly, they believe that lifting local businesses and nonprofits lifts everyone who lives here. And isn't that the kind of bank you want behind your business? Become an Eagle Bank business client and you'll partner with a dedicated local banking expert. And because they know our market so well, they also know your customers and your competition and can tailor individual financial products and services that drive results. They're straightforward and transparent, always a phone call away. And they're fast decision makers, so you won't miss out on opportunities. The health of our communities is tied to our businesses, and Eagle Bank believes in doing all they can to keep local businesses soaring.
Let's be real, lawsuits are not fun, but with Paulson & Nace, at least they're a little easier. Paulson & Nace is a DC law firm in every sense of the word. It was founded here in 1979. Partner Chris Nace is a local who cares deeply about the DC community, even serving on the board of the local branch of the Living Classrooms Foundation in his free time. Nace and his associates Samantha Peters and Maya Perry handle medical malpractice, wrongful death, and other complex injury cases. And they don't just settle every case. They'll go to court. They'll fight for you. Paulson & Nace has even been recognized as one of U.S. News' best law firms. So if you have been hurt or lost a loved one because of someone else's mistake or negligence, call Paulson & Nace for a no-obligation consultation. Visit www.paulsonandnace.com. That's PAULSONANDNACE.com. Or call 202-463-1999.
Yeah, I mean, I am sympathetic to what you've just laid out, that the people who work at Giant, I want them to be paid fairly and treated fairly. However, I'm just a customer, right? It is not my job to figure out how to make the math work of Giant, this big corporation running a store effectively, right? Like, I'm just trying to shop. Giant is a big corporation. I don't think that me as an individual should be burdened with how to make everything work on Giant's end. That's just not I think the whole dynamic that says that, oh, well, you've got to tighten your belt, Bridget. The little pleasure of life of going grocery shopping, we have to make that a little bit worse so that it makes it easier for Giant's math to work on running this store. I don't accept that. This is not my responsibility to figure out. And I would also say, like, I even question whether or not this is even an effective policy. Like, I would love to have more information about whether or not it truly is people just like putting things in big bags and walking out. The Giant that I go to most of the time has an armed guard right out in front. And so part of me is like, someone needs to explain to me how.
Drop the avocado or I'll shoot.
Right. Like, I don't understand how that guard up front so far has been unable to deter someone from going into Giant, filling up a bag with stuff and walking out without paying. Now that same guard is going to be effective at being like, actually, can you leave that bag at the door? I don't understand how this is effective. I truly do not.
Wait, can you leave the bag at the door? I mean, is there a place where you can leave your bags?
So I have gone into Giant several times since this policy has changed. At first, I was like, you're throwing me out. This is an outrage. The next few times I was like trying to see what kind of bags they will let in. That their Giant is saying like, oh, you can bring in reusable bags. That is BS. They did not let me bring in my reusable bag that I bought at Giant. So when you come in to Giant, I can only speak for the Columbia Heights location. They have you leave your bag at the front of the store. You might be asking, oh, well, is it locked up? No, it's not locked up. Does it appear to be well guarded? It sure doesn't, right? And so like...
But there's a man with a gun right there.
But he's on his phone. It's not a situation where you feel like if that man cannot stop somebody from walking out with a bunch of unpaid merchandise, I'm to believe he's going to watch my laptop bag that you wouldn't let me bring in. Like, it is pushing the risk of theft from the store onto me as a consumer, as an individual, right? And I will say in other countries, I've been to stores like small shops where they have lockers. So if you come into the store and you've got a bag from another grocery store or a backpack, they'll have you lock it up in a locker. I'm not saying that Giant should do this, but they are certainly, it is just like a bunch of bags not really being watched carefully by anybody. And somebody on Reddit, which by the way, they are pissed about this on Reddit, said, I almost always shop on my way home from work carrying a work bag because Giant is on my commute. They told me I'd have to leave my bag at the door, and the guard was maybe 5'2". I am not allowed to just leave my work laptop around. Plus, this ban unfairly targets commuters, school kids with bags, and the disabled who may not be able to carry handbags. Not to mention parents. I feel like if you are a parent of a small child, you probably have a bag of like whatever things a baby needs. Like, are you saying that you can't bring that stuff into the store that you need to shop comfortably with your child? Like, it's just, I don't get it.
Yeah, I mean, look at, again, in their defense, if you think about Costco, right? Like, think of all the indignities of shopping at Costco. They don't even give you bags at the end. You got to take the stuff out in the cart. There is no bags. There are typically really long lines. But people will put up with these indignities because there's so much stuff and the stuff is so cheap. That is more for suburbs or people with big houses, because if you have a normal sized apartment, like there's not that many places to store like 6 months worth of toilet paper. So Giant is sort of seeing what you'll put up with. But I think that the place where it kind of intersects with DC, like public policy, right, where we've kind of really tilted public policy in DC to try to encourage people to not drive, to encourage people to bicycle, encourage people to do things that would require them to, as you say, stop on your way home from work with your expensive laptop in your bag and need to do your grocery shopping that way. That is the place where this seems like really, I mean, just sort of sad and problematic and so on.
Yeah. And I think that is why this feels like such a big deal to me, because in a lot of ways, it feels like an attack on the way people live their lives in DC, right? I understand that crime is a real issue. And I don't say that as a way to like name check it to be like, oh, I mentioned crime, but I'm really just like poo-pooing it. It's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
People are not wrong for noting the ways that it feels like our lives have really been upended by crime. But I think that Giant is exploiting the conditions around crime to make changes that help them make the math work on their staffing decisions and their financial decisions, and just kind of hoping we don't see it for what it is. And I think like it trickles down into these policies that negatively impact people who most of whom did nothing to deserve this. The average person shopping at Giant is not going in and filling bags of stuff and walking out. And so I just feel like, in city life, you've got to find these simple pleasures and certain mundanities of life. And I just don't accept that the simple pleasure of urban life has to be made worse in order for Giant to run their company effectively. I just don't tolerate that. Like, I don't accept that. It is a giant problem, and we should not be tolerating this idea that, like, we should be sacrificing being able to do a normal thing like running to the store after work without it being turned into this draconian nightmare to help them solve it. I don't accept that.
And it seems like it's sort of a vicious cycle here, right? That what I think we've learned is the more personnel around, the less shoplifting there is. It seems pretty obvious. So you reduce the number of staff by like putting in self-checkout. You reduce the number of staff, and I'm sure there's a bunch of backstage ways where the number of staff is reduced. In addition to making it like mildly more irritating for the customer who like might want to ask, like where a certain item is, it also means that there's less eyes on a potential shoplifter, which means that you have higher pilferage, which means that you can afford fewer staff. And it goes in a very bad way.
Exactly. And yeah, I mean, I don't think it was any of us who told Giant to make the big investment in self-checkout. That was them. That was their decision. Retailers all over the country are now backing away from self-checkout because they're realizing how much theft it does allow. And so, like, I do think this is a problem to solve, but like solve it at the corporate level. Like, I didn't have anything to do with that.
But other retailers, I think including Giant, they're not necessarily backing away from it. They're just investing in better like cameras right above the self-checkout so they can bust you, which is to say like tech may help fix the swiping from the self-checkout problem.
Yeah, this is on another podcast I host, we did a very deep dive into this. I'll just say the anti-shoplifting tech in stores, I would not be risking shoplifting from a self-checkout anytime soon. If you've been doing it, maybe reconsider. I think there was a time where you were like, oh yeah, you can just charge it as bananas and save a little money. The tech has gotten so good with the cameras and the facial recognition. I would not be risking that. That's another conversation, but I just wanted to say.
So is there another grocery you could go to?
So luckily, I live in like a pretty grocery dense area. There's Target, there's Lidl that just recently opened in DC, USA, which our household has sort of been like boycotting Giant a little bit. And it's like, well, if you're going to treat me this way, I'll just go to Lidl. But I wonder, like, how long will it be until Lidl or Target makes this policy too? That's my concern. And I do have some good news for folks, which is that Giant, I think, can be bullied into changing their policies. This is a little bit like going way, way back, but way back when Giant was first rolling out self-checkout, there was this problem where at peak rush hour checkout times when like the registers were all full, they would almost never have every self-checkout open. They got called out in, I want to say, Prince of Petworth. This was around like 2010. And enough people gave them crap for it that they rolled out a new campaign where they promised to have all the registers open at rush hour. And if they didn't, you would get a free rotisserie chicken if you went and complained. I don't know how long that lasted, but I did make a complaint once. I remember that very clearly. So I say that to say, Giant can be bullied. Giant can be gotten to. And if you are someone for whom this policy, you're like, this policy is horrible and I hate it as much as Bridget does, I think we should all be making a collective stink about it.
All right. So what's the state of your fridge right now? How close to grocery time are you?
Well, this is really kind of where the rubber meets the road because our house is protesting Giant. And I may have referred to myself as the Rosa Parks of grocery shopping once or twice because I'm like, I'm going to change this policy. But we're getting down to the wire where I have to make a fridge restock. And it's like, am I actually going to not go to Giant? So ask me again in a couple of days whether or not my boycott has really maintained or if I've caved and just like am carrying my stuff home loose in my arms or whatever.
All right. Well, pick me up a rotisserie chicken when you go.
Will do. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, share it with your friend who is angered by this policy. You can rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.